one problem about starting early in the morning is that we don't have a full audience until fairly late in the morning. Unlike some complaints yesterday when some of the commentators say that if you start in the afternoon, people get sleepy. Well, in the morning, I'll probably not full attendance, but in about 15 minutes, I'm sure we have a lot of people coming here. I would like to introduce on my right-hand side, on the left-hand side, Professor John Wong. Of course, he is a very distinguished professor. Presently, he's a professorial fellow and academic advisor at the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore. He has held many visiting positions at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, and Stanford, and he held the chair of ASEAN Studies at the University of Toronto. Professor Wong has many publications, and I don't have the time the whole day to read to you all his publications, impossible. He wrote on China, East Asia, ASEAN, and he has done consulting work for the Singaporean government, also SCAP, ADB, and etc. So I would like to introduce to you Professor John Wong. On my right side, your left side, please give him a good hand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Professor Nuja, for your kind words. I just go right into my presentation. Yesterday, the former Setjen, Mr. Sulin, said he didn't like the word emerging, and emerging, he didn't like it, you know. But as an economy, we're talking about the international economic order. It is emerging. Emerging is very important for the economy because we are dealing with dynamic world. Growth, changes, and growth and structural change are actually the same process. You're always dealing with changes. So we see the international economic or global, regional economic landscape continue to be full of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty because of globalization and the frequent outbreak of political, social changes, revolution here and there, and continuing technological change. So we are dealing with a dynamic world. So emerging is a very appropriate word. You know. Now, but in one thing, in one area, I think when we talk about the future, the shape of the international economic order, one thing is very clear, is that it would be, for some time, it would be dominated by the big four, EU, USA, China, and Japan, in this order. But very soon, no, this pecking order will be changed because the rise of China. You know, China would exceed, would take the place of USA, you know, and then EU. See, so that's basically the essence of my my talk this morning. The rise of China, how this will affect the new international economic order, the regional and global landscape. Now, when we talk about China, we all know that China, since the economic reform, can we change? Okay, sorry. Not really IT savvy. Huh? Huh? Can anybody fix it? Yeah? No. Anyway, you know, we all know that China's has experienced dynamic double-digit rate of growth for over good. Thank you. Huh? Okay. But this thing is blocking. For over 3 decades, double-digit rate of growth. You. How come? Maybe. Okay, yeah. Because it had to be used mail here. No. No, I want to go back. I'm sorry there. Huh? Maybe not enough battery. No, go back to the first one. No, I'm sorry for this hitches. You know, the Chinese economy experienced double hyper growth for over 30 years, you know. So growth means GDP increases. So if you are 7% growth, you double your GDP in 10 years. And China had this over 10% growth for over 30 years, so GDP has been double, you see? So what happened is, at the beginning of the reform in 1980, China's GDP, compared with what China's GDP last year, was 140 times. You see? At the beginning of the reform, China per capita GDP in nominal term was US dollar about $300. And today it's about almost $8,000. See? Last time was lower than most of the ASEAN countries, you know. And today's China per capita GDP of $8,000 US, you know, is higher than Thailand and Indonesia, but still lower than Singapore and Malaysia, and so on. Now, the important point I want to discuss with you that, you know, now we all know the Chinese economy has, after 33 years of growth, 35 years ago, you know, has actually slowed down. See? But what is slowed down for China is still high growth. See? So in a way, you know, now according to my original estimate, you know, China would be in about 5, even less than 10 years, we catch up with USA. Would be the world's largest economies. But actually, you know, according to the recent IMF estimate, using PPP, purchasing power parity, GDP calculation, China's economy, in total GDP term, you know, by the end of this year, will actually be higher than USA. You see, but that's about IMF. Now, if you ask me a question later, I will explain what you mean by PPP. PPP is basically used almost American price to measure the GDP. See? So tend to be of exaggerated. In any way, what's happening is what's quite clear that in a matter of time, China will be the #1 economy. You know, it's not a few years, maybe 5 years or at least 10 years. See, so this is my argument. Now, we all know that, you know, Chinese economy has experienced slowdown, so-called the end of hypergrowth, double-digit rate of growth. But this so-called slowdown actually has been misunderstood, misinterpreted. You know, what is slow growth for China? You know, actually still very high. And in fact, we all know that no economy, could continue to have hyper growth, you know, year after year, you know, for so long. Now we look at East Asia, the most dynamic economic region. Japan had high growth, double-digit rate for 25 years, and then come down. And Korea and Taiwan, maybe about the same, just over 20 years. Hong Kong, Singapore, less than 20 years, because, you know, smaller economy, you run out of potential for growth, you run into labor shortage. Singapore in particular, after 10 years high growth, we run into labor shortage and so on. But China had this high growth, you know, for 30 years, so it must come down. This is in a matter of common sense also, see? And also we know that after a while, you know, analytically speaking, you know, China's economic growth, you know, the sources of growth will be weakened. It will continue to have high growth. Now this table, I think I want to Now, some of you may like to take a look at this. You look at Japan. When we talk about high growth today, people have forgotten economic history. You see, today when the Indonesian economy recovers 6% growth, high growth. Philippines has 6.5% high growth. But actually, Japan had averaged 10% growth in the 1950s, in the 1960s, and most of the 1970s. 25 years, 10%. So you see, that's really high growth. Korea, Taiwan also had 20 years, you see. And then China have 35 years because China is much bigger, you see. So now, but then growth had to come down because now if your economy, you analyze growth, you look at the supply side. Supply side growth, the growth would, is the result of the labor force increase and also productivity increase, Now, the labor force, you know that China, after 30 years high growth, it's running short of the cheap labor. This is what we call the Nobel Prize economy, other lose turning point. That means that's the time that there will be no more redundant labor. You got to pay more for your from the rural service labor. You got to pay more for your workers, and this is happening. See, so because of this. See, growth must come down. See, and also productivity growth cannot be sustained at the same high rate because it's easier for you to have productivity growth when the economy started to reform, to introduce simple technology. But later on, productivity growth, as in Singapore, USA, depends a lot of R&D, much more difficult to achieve. See? So that's a common sense. Now you look at the demand side, any economy growth. This is economic 101. GDP growth means Y equals C plus I. Consumption plus investment, see, and plus export minus import. Now, domestic consumption, domestic investment is what we call domestic demand. X minus M is what we call external demand. See, now China's growth all these years have been basically fueled by rising investment, fixed asset investment, and the consumption share is very low. In fact, much lower than. But we know that the U.S. economy is growth based on consumption. Over 70% of the U.S., 7% of the GDP on consumption. China is very low. It's only 50%. In fact, by expenditure, it's only 35%. It's very low. See, but there's nothing wrong with this. Japan used to be saying, you produce and save. You save and then you save before you consume. See, but in the long run, you have to consume. See, so but in the long run, China's economic growth will have to depend on domestic consumption. But for poor economy, you can't do that. You cannot consume your way to prosperity. America can do that. They got everything. They got technology, infrastructure. But poor economy like Indonesia, India, you got to invest first before you consume. See, so this is the changes for China in future, and more dependent on consumption, and also investment is a problem because a lot of industry are running into excess capacity. You see, so in that sense, so Chinese economy, we have to change gear, So the driver have been changed, and it's more emphasis on consumption and also more emphasis on domestic demand rather than external demand. External demand because Chinese export are running into, we're losing competitive advantage because the rising value of the RMB, exchange rate problem, and also rising costs and increasing wages. This is the same thing that happened to all the other ASEAN economies, Japan, Korea, and so on. So that means the economy had to restructure and upgrade. See? Now, I spent a few minutes on the next phase of Chinese economy. Would be a drive to become a developed economy. Now, Chinese leadership has accepted that from now on the economy will grow at the medium rate 7%, around 7%. See, for many years, next few years. This is a new normal, see, and that is also an opportunity for reform, see, and then eventually, eventually, the economy we're trying to reach the high income level. Now, according to the World Bank, they already say that within 10 years, or at most by 2030, China's will become a high, per capita GDP, nominal term would be 16,000 US. But that would be, definitely China would be a developed economy by that conventional definition, you see. Now, this is my argument. But then, of course, now the important point to remember is that China may become a developed economy in terms of GDP, statistically speaking. But developed economy, but doesn't mean that China is a high-income economy, particularly per capita GDP in China. Even after 10, 15 years, China per capita GDP is still very low. Maybe about 16,000 US, because of the huge population. And because of this, China will never be maybe a developed economy, but not a high-income economy. It's not an affluent society because the per capita GDP is still very low. But it will have a lot of impact on the world economy. Actually, I have the argument that in a transition to developed economy, China will overcome the middle income trap and other problems. So because I know time you're going to that, I'm sorry. You see, what happened, what kind of role China is going to play in the world? See? Now, when China becomes the largest economy in the world, see, of course, then China would be important in geo-economic sense. But for many years, China's geo-economic advantage cannot be translated into geopolitical benefit, because a lot of problem, China's peaceful rise and all this message had not been wholeheartedly embraced by its neighbor. China still have outstanding territorial problem with certain countries and so on. See. But in economic sense, it fits in very well, because Deng Xiaoping always say that China needs the world, and the world needs China. So it's a scenario of interdependence. China continues to be like this. But the important thing is China. Remember, China is such a big economy. So whatever that China does, China produce, China consume, there will be a tremendous impact on the world. See, and that's a positive sign. China can be a leading, will be engine of economic growth for the economy in the region. This is happening. See, China's import raw material and manufacturing product from ASEAN country. So that is the engine of growth for the ASEAN economy. And China is also pushed for integration, because China is the home to many regional and global production networks. So China's role will act as a kind of as a catalyst for regional economic integration. That this is happening. But then there's a positive side. There's only a negative side, because for example, China, is a big producer of everything. So China is also is a big consumer of energy and natural resources. China, is a big producer of the carbon dioxide, and it's a polluter and so on. So there is a negative spillover. So in a way, China still has to learn to be a responsible stakeholder. What's happening is that I always give the example. Now China is today. China has 120 million cars. Every year it's over 20 million cars. 20 million cars. On the market, but still, per capita in China, only about 12 people per 100 America, 80%, 80 people 100. Okay. If China want to reach the same level as America, China would have the 1 billion more car, and there won't be the energy left in the whole world. So China had to learn, to be responsible, also to the world economy, a responsible stakeholder, something. This is in the dependent world, China takes and also China has to give. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Wong, it's very clear. The point he has been making is that China will become the leading economic power very soon. In fact, by some evaluations, it has already overtaken the United States. And the important thing is that he questions whether the economic well-being of the people in China will be that very good, because the GDP per capita is still quite low as compared to other countries. However, the ending note is very important, because China will become the leading economic player in global economics. They also have to become responsible stakeholder. So that's a very important point which we need to study in future. I would like to, on my left and on your right, on the other side, Professor Somchai Pakapat Viwat. Professor Somchai is a well-known speaker, a well-known commentator, a well-known lecturer, and a well-known scholar. He has been a senator, a vice rector of university, an advisor to the Stock Exchange of Thailand. More recently, he has added some responsibilities. He has become a member of the board of directors of many companies, okay? For example, Safco, which is a well-known international company, and also a bank, a member of a bank. He has earned numerous degrees, numerous degrees, I would like to stress, from France, from Spain, etc. I say etc. because I have been told by some of my colleagues that he received an ultimatum from his fiancée, his wife, that if he didn't stop studying, that would be end, right? So he had to terminate his continuation of education because he always has it lust to study more and more. So I would like to open the floor to Dr. Somchai. Please keep your speech to about 50 minutes, please. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about the so-called emerging global order that paved the way for what we call the changing landscape for the economic issue. If you look at what happened after the demise or the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think that the world has changed profoundly, both in scope and dimension. One thing that we could notice is that the old Cold War system and the bipolar system has already been transforming into what we call new order in the making. But anyway, what we could notice from the changing is that new players, markets, trends, and issues are emerging. Of course, alongside with some of the existing, the new one. So I will try to paint how the future will be according to the schedule. The first picture is the changing player market. If you look at what happened now, though the old nation state persists, but I think that there have already been a new player resulting from what we call the breaking up of the old nation state, like the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and something like that. That is a newcomer. Secondly, the old, what we call regional state, like what we call the supranational EU, has already been transforming in what we call a global paradox. On one hand, after the crisis, we have what we call a trickling of close integration through what we call the banking union. But on the other hand, you look at what happened to the unity after the election in the European Parliament. You have seen a number of what we call Eurosceptics are emerging in the European Parliament. And this this September, there will be, for example, our referendum of the Scotland. This is augur something what will happen in the future of EU. A global paradox. On one hand, you have a closer integration, but on the other hand, there is some problem inside what we call the unity. Apart from this, you have also seen what we call a player through what we call economic integration. You know, rising up from the schedule of free trade area into common market, something like what we call a new player as a group. Multinational cooperation has been very active in what we call defining our landscape. You could not disregard, for example, the hedge fund and all this. Alongside with this, we have also the non-governmental organization that have a bearing on what we call the future economic relation. Look at what happened. The non-governmental organization try to limit, for example, the trade flow through what we call sometimes COVID protectionism. But on the other hand, this is what we call a fair trade. For example, what happened in Thailand, you will see the second tier and third tier is a new landscape. There is what we call a new issue, human trafficking. The new player is also meaning the old one is weakening. Look at WTO. For how long the Doha has been struggling? Last year, severely limited. From 2001 until, this is the longest one. Our ambassador to the WTO could confirm that. And what about UN? It's very slow in achieving the target. What about IMF and World Bank? A lot of persons call for the reform. Apart from that, new institutions try to fill the gap are emerging. We have G20. We have what? We have FELAC, Forum for East Asia and Latin America Cooperation, that will, this year, Thailand with Costa Rica will co-chair. And last year, the FELAC have what we call the first vision from the FELAC Vision Group. Apart from that, you have something that some people doesn't know what it is, Eurasia Economic Union. This kind of thing paint the landscape, Eurasia Economic Union, triggering the crisis in Ukraine, about what we call which way Ukraine will belong, to the Eastern Partnership of the EU or part of the Eurasia. That is what we call the new players. If we look at the trend, it's very evident. We have what we call a triple regionalism after the collapse of the Cold War. The first one we call the regionalism. Look at the landscape. In Asia, after 1993, we have after AEC, ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN plus 5, now it's turned into ASEAN. Apart from that, what we have here, Eurasia Union. In EU, apart from the 28 countries of EU, you have EFTA. EFTA and EU become EEA, European Economic Area. Apart from that, you have Mediterranean Community. You have the Lome Convention turned into what we call Cotonou free trade. Look at Latin America. You have one side, Mercosur on the Atlantic one. The Pacific one, you have a Comunidad Andina, the Andean community. Apart from that, you have CARICOM, you have UNASUR, and 4 countries, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, just forming what we call the Pacific Alliance. The second level of the regional, we call the inter-regional cooperation. We have APEC on the one hand, we have TPP on the other hand, and then we are going to create what we call something, for example, like the investment and partnership transatlantic. Apart from that, we have ACD, Asia Cooperation Dialogue. And finally, the triple one, the last one, we have also triggered a new what we call sub-regional cooperation. Here in Thailand, you have IMT, GT, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, and we also have what we call GMS. This is the trend that is also expanding everywhere after the demise of the collapse. That is what we call the new landscape. A shift, the second trend is the shift in what we call the regional global economic landscape. Emerging economy are emerging to have a greater role in defining what we call the landscape. Nobel Prize winner called this landscape what we call the next convergence, the gapping of what we call the developed and developing in the future. He called this one the third industrial revolution. Professor from Singapore, Kishore Mahbubani, in his recent book, called this one the Great Convergence, a new trend of what we call the emergence of what we call the middle class that converge from the emerging country and also the developed country. This is the second trend. And the third trend that defines the landscape, what we call the hallmark. The hallmark of the landscape is here: globalization, interdependence, and connectivity. When we talk globalization, the hallmark affects not only the macro level, but the micro level. Once we talk about from global to local, but the globalization also supplement or complement with from local to global. You see, for example, the creative economy is just the hallmark of from local to global. The jamgung and the Thai food is also spreading along what we call the junk food from the Western. This is what we call the landscape. Interdependence means what? The rise of the rest, the rise of China, the rise of Iran, the rise of Russia, BRICS. So the rise of G20. So it means that the interdependence signal the end of what we call the American dominance, the end of what we call unilateralism. How could you define the world when new issue and new player have been abandoned? So the world now is pointing to what we call multilateralism and also multipolarism. Faris Scalia has written a book, Post-American World, The Rise of the Rest, that is another landscape. Connectivity augurs a new world order that subsumes what we call the list of what we call apocalypse. Look at what happened to Tom Yam Goong. Look at the subprime problem. Look at the euro crisis that could trigger, for example, the blowing up of the world economic relation. And finally, the trend is that in the past, we talk about the trend of the North-South, but today we talk alongside North-South, we talk about South-South, we talk about East-West relation. That is the fourth trend that defines the landscape. What about the third one, the new issues? The landscape of today and tomorrow and in the future of the global economic landscape will be dominated or characterized by new challenges. In the past, we talk about trade liberalization, but look happened. The transition is the WTO, beginning with what we call liberalization of service, capital, and person. With that, change from GATT into WTO. That is not only that. Whenever the superpower talk about FTA, in the past, FTAs mean just only liberalization of goods. But nowadays, look at TPP, look at everywhere, have already been in the FTA, including what we call liberalization of service, liberalization of capital, even including what we call the public procurement. So this is the new trend. Because of the world is characterized by the IT, intellectual property, the service. The new issue, of course, the traditional concern in security and economic cooperation remain, but you look at the list of the new issue: economic development, human security, environmental calamity concerns, human trafficking, governance for diverse and inclusive society. All these are new issues that emerge to define what we call a new landscape that we are living in. The third issue, if you look at what happened, we have already emerged. Some people say that the worst is over, but yet the recent economic situation that we could see has not yet been settled. We look at the landscape around the world recently. Weak economy is still the hallmark. In EU, you have the problem of deflation. In China, you have, for the first time in more than 2 decades, the weakest economic growth. And what about the shadow banking? What about all the problem of what we call consumption? How could you transform your labor intensive into what we call a value added? So the future is still very uncertain. What about the employment? The world is emerging. Dow Jones, fly new high, nearly every week, but yet there is insufficient employment, insufficient social inclusion, insufficient or inadequate economic growth. What about social and fiscal and final vulnerability? It's still there. New issue, old issue persists. Low progress in fiscal consolidation. What about sovereign debt crisis? Argentina has been over 100 years in the past is one of the top 5 that now struggle to rid of what we call the debt crisis. Increasing concentration of wealth and incomplete reform. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would say that with the emerging landscape characterized by new player market, trend, and issue, what about the existing institutions? I think that our existing institutions are not sufficient enough or capable enough to address all the new issues. So reform of the old one need to be called for. IMF, the World Bank, to address or at least reflecting what we call the changing landscape of what we call the equation of the economic power. Secondly, new institutions need to be created in order to address or handle all the new issues. In summary, I would say that the new world order could be one or two. On one side, that is what we call the geopolitical term. We have 2 schools of thought of geopolitical term. The old school, what we call the realist, say that the geopolitical term is characterized by zero-sum game, looking at pure people and human nature with a pessimistic one. So that is zero-sum game. So there is no what we call cooperation. And new world order for the liberal one call for what we call win-win. There is a possibility of what we call the cooperation. But frankly speaking, for me, these 2 schools is not what we call mutually exclusive. Some will go to win-win, like what we call the regionalization. But on the other hand, we have China, Iran, and Russia will try to answer for the second one, the zero-sum game. So I think that the world order, the landscape, is either on the middle between what we call the liberal and the realistic geopolitical terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Somchai. Professor Somchai is trying to highlight the new order in the making. And he mentions the rising role of the non-government organizations. He talked about various groupings which are now emerging. and he says it signals the end of the U.S. dominance in global economics. He mentioned intellectual property, which our next speaker will discuss a little bit. On intellectual property, I would like to bring one note. There has been a discussion recently that the patents of intellectual property maybe needs to be revised because right now there's the tendency to write out in trying to receive a patent very wide scope, so that it becomes very difficult for new innovations to take place. And I think that's one thing that will be discussed in the future. He also, Dr. Somchai also discussed about the emerging role of governance, in the global economy, and that's an important role now. You see that many countries, all countries in EU and the United States have implemented governance regulations strictly, so that in trading and doing business, you cannot pay under the table money and so on. They're very strict about it. Also, he mentioned, which is very important, which the next speaker will discuss, that the inadequacy of present institutions in dealing with the changing landscape. So that's another thing we have to see how we would deal with it. So I would like to introduce on my left hand side next to me, Datuk Subramanayam. He has held many positions. He was a former ambassador of Malaysia to the WTO. He was a senior trade commissioner to Hong Kong, China. Also, he was Deputy Secretary General of Trade. His responsibilities included developing trade policy and strategy for the Singaporean government. He also has been advisor to ASEAN and participated in meetings in ASEAN, APEC, UNCTAD, and ESCAP, for example. So he has tremendous practical knowledge about the issue, which he will discuss. He is not a person to retire easily. No, he's a retired ambassador, but not a person to retire easily. Now he is a distinguished fellow of the Strategic International Studies, Malaysia, and also adjunct professor at numerous universities. So I would like to introduce to you Dr. Datuk Subramanayam. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's still appropriate for me to take the opportunity to thank the organizers, Thammasat University, for inviting me to participate in this conference. I deem it a great privilege and honor to address such a distinguished gathering here this morning. It was very interesting presentations have been made this morning. John Wong spoke about rising China and the role that is expected to play in the global, emerging global economic landscape. And Dr. Somchai, I think I must say that you have, in a way, given a very broad sweep of the number of issues, the trend, the issues, confronting the global economy, and all of them are very pertinent, very relevant. It was a very general presentation, but nevertheless, it gives an idea of what we are in for in the coming years in terms of the global economy. Now, my presentation this morning is obviously going to focus specifically on the functioning of the multilateral trading system, which is the kind of trade governance system, and the role of World Trade Organization, especially over the last 10 years. And it's very interesting. I think Dr. Suchai was the Director General of WTO. Dr. Somchai, you mentioned that the role of multilateral institutions are now becoming extremely important. They're being challenged in a way by the number of emerging issues that these institutions are confronted with. Unfortunately, we don't have someone from, we'll be speaking on IMF or the World Bank, but I will speak essentially on the World Trade Organization, how the challenges that WTO is now facing is under tremendous pressure really to move with the times so that it continue to sustain its relevance and credibility. And I must say, And as Dr. Somchai actually alluded to it, like many other multilateral institutions, the WTO is not well equipped. As it is currently structured, it is not well equipped to address the changes taking place in the global economy. And the changes which are taking place in the global economy do have an impact on global trade flows. And that's why I thought I should focus on this very important organization called WTO, which is actually administers the conduct of international trade relations within the framework of the multilateral trading system. Now, first of all, by way of introduction, I just want to say that all trading nations, whether they are big or small, have recognized that it is in their best interest, it's in their best interest to be part of the WTO. And all ASEAN members today are members of the WTO. The last one was Laos. And it shows how important it is for all trading nations who want to be effectively integrated into the global economy, how important it is for them to be part of this very important organization. So overall, I must say that since the inception of the multilateral trading system in 1947, as a result of the Havana Charter, that was a time when 26 countries got together at a conference because the world was going through this global economic recession. And you had this beggar thy neighbor policies, the inward-looking trade policies, protectionism was at its highest, and the world was not going anywhere. So it was felt that something had to be done in order to put the global economy on the right track. And that's why they met in Havana in 1947, and that gave birth to the rules-based trading system. And then, of course, the body or the forum that administers this was GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Of course, some of us joke and say that it's a general agreement to talk and talk. But nevertheless, it was the forum until the establishment of the WTO in 1995, with the conclusion of the Uruguay round. But I must say, as someone who has been following this very closely, that we have indeed seen a lot of good things happening in the multilateral trading system since its inception in 1947. For example, it has in fact set a very predictable, secured, and transparent kind of a regime for trading nations to trade without, being restricted in terms of, unfair competition or even imposition of measures which are aimed at restricting international trade, for example. So it has helped. And overall, it has led to the economic growth of countries around the world. It has. And I must say that when there was this financial crisis, the very fact that we have the WTO in existence, and its attempts to ensure that countries don't slide backwards, that they don't go towards protectionism, there was monitoring mechanisms instituted in the WTO. There were discussions, there were meetings to ensure that countries followed the rules and disciplines as set out in the multilateral trading system. And I must say that it was quite effective. There were countries, of course, during the financial crisis resorted to some form of protectionism, but they were kept at the barest minimum. And that's, that's a very good thing that we had WTO in existence at that time. Now, another important thing that I would like to stress is that although the system has been quite favorable, somehow the impact of the trade liberalization initiatives which were undertaken by GATT, there were 8 rounds of negotiations actually, the reduction in tariffs, in non-tariff barriers, and the formulation of new disciplines, rules, in the rule-making area, for example, all this had, as I said, had led to expansion of trade flows. But one point that I would like to highlight is that somehow the impact has been different to different countries. Different categories of countries, the impact has, somewhat, it varies from country to country. A group of countries, especially in Asia, for example, and some of them even in ASEAN, we had somehow, been able to shape, we'll have to shape our policies, made adjustments, and responded to the global changes. And as a result of that, we have been able to accomplish results, good trade performance. That's one side of it. But at the same time, there are a number of developing economies, especially the LDCs, who have to face tremendous challenges in terms of adjusting. They had to incur significant costs of adjustment, for example, as a result of trade liberalization. And there was impact on employment, and there were fiscal costs as well. So these were global countries which did not really benefit from the rules-based trading system. But overall, until 1995, I would say, the rules-based trading system had generally been of some use to trading nations, have been helpful. But now comes the important turning point of the working of the multilateral trading system. And this came as a result of the conclusion of the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations. It was launched in 1986 and concluded in 1994. And I can tell you, for the first time ever, the character of the rules-based trading system changed quite significantly. Why? Because the Uruguay round agreements, the scope and the outcome of the negotiations had a tremendous impact on domestic policy making of the countries concerned, especially developing countries. It covered a whole range of new issues, as Dr. Samchai mentioned. It covered services, it covered intellectual property rights, it brought agriculture into the GATT system. It was previously out of it. The trade-related investment measures will have an impact on developing countries in terms of its industrialization policies. So it had, it broadened the scope. And in a way, after its implementation, it in fact deepened the imbalances and inequities, inherent in the multilateral trading system. And the developing countries in particular were quite adversely affected. The kind of promises which were made in the Uruguay round, that the agricultural sector would be open, the clothing and apparel, the clothing and textile sector would be open, we brought back under disciplines of GATT, never really materialized. So it was, in many ways, and the agreements were in many ways were skewed to serve the interest of the developed countries. And that was the turning point, it somehow changed the attitude of developing countries in the participation in the international trading system. Before the Uruguay round, developing countries were quite passive. There were not many developing countries which participated in the multilateral trading system, essentially because they were not trading nations, and therefore they played a passive role. But today, it's a different scenario, and as you pointed out, the emergence of new players. That's particularly very important when you talk in terms of the multilateral trading system. It has changed. So why I say this is because, there is an increasing perception by developing countries that the liberalization initiatives undertaken in the WTO have been poorer, especially in product areas of importance to developing countries, of interest to developing countries. And even in the rule-making areas, the rules are not as balanced as they should be, nor do they focus, on areas which are of concern to developing countries. So in a way, the impression that developing countries have today on the multilateral trading system is that it's very much tilted against their economic interests. Now, I must say that, why I'm saying this is because the WTO membership is not a homogeneous entity. It comprises countries at different stages of development. There's great diversity, and the majority of the membership in WTO today comprise developing countries. And that is why, developing countries are feeling increasingly frustrated, disappointed, the way the multilateral trading system is evolving, because somehow it doesn't seem to have taken into account the interests of developing countries. So this is a challenge. And I must say that developing countries are beginning to assume a proactive role in the process, in the WTO process. How? There are many developing countries today who have emerged as important trading nations. You talk about Brazil, you talk about Mexico, you talk about some South African countries. You can talk about ASEAN countries. You've got Korea, you've got Turkey. All these are emerging, developing countries who have begun to play a very important role in shaping the WTO agenda. Now, you could see that. You could see their performance and the progress they achieved in relation to the Seattle Ministerial Conference. You can see that in the Cancun Ministerial Conference. And you can see what's happening in the Doha round of multilateral trade negotiations today. You have a stalemate in the Doha round simply because developing countries are beginning to feel that they have every right to ensure that the agenda and the outcomes of the negotiations have a development dimension. It is development friendly and it serves their interests. And therefore, they are gathering, they're grouping, there are different kinds of groups looking at different interests, but the same objective in terms of they're not going to accept an agenda that is being pushed to them by the developed economies. They want to have a role in shaping the agenda. And they want to have issues of interest to them included in the agenda. And they want to ensure that the outcomes of negotiations are balanced and development friendly, and not further deepen the inequities and imbalances inherent in the multilateral trading system. And I think it's a good cause. It's a good cause. Because, and as Samchai mentioned about the multipolar situation, there's no, this development has in a way diminished the importance of US and EU in the context of the multilateral trading system. The transatlantic alliance, which featured prominently over the last 50 years of the evolution of the rules-based multilateral trading system, is not there anymore. We're now beginning to see the pressure coming from a group of countries which were outside the transatlantic alliance. And this will be the trend. Of course, it's going to make negotiations very difficult. It'll be politically very, it'll be very politically very intensive, very difficult, and outcomes will be very difficult to achieve. Very difficult to achieve. Wow, 5 minutes. So this is where the situation. Now the challenges. I think it's important for me to highlight what are the challenges facing the WTO today. Now, first of all, you have, there's tremendous pressure building up on WTO to broaden the remit of the WTO in terms of what issues should be included, what not, what shouldn't be included. It has focused on trade-related measures. Now there is a call by countries to, in order to keep up with the commercial development of the global economy, the scope must be broadened. Now, this is an issue that has to be confronted by all members to ensure that there is equity in terms of the agenda setting. It cannot be, we cannot continue the same way we did before, where it only has items of interest to developed countries and not developing countries. So it has to be more balanced. And I think this is one challenge that is facing the country today. Now, what kind of issues should be included? Should it only be confined to trade-related measures? Or should it include, should the WTO become the locus of economic regulation for every global economic issue, which I don't think it should be the case. So this is the challenge that the wider membership of the WTO will be facing, when it has to deal with the scope, the remit of the WTO. Now, that is one challenge. The second challenge, of course, is, to me, the proliferation of RTAs. I think this has been alluded to. The rapid increase in regional pacts, FTAs, RTAs, is having an impact on the multilateral trading system. Is it mutually supportive? Is it a stumbling block? Is it a building block? Now these are issues which are coming up. But unfortunately, you see that 50% of global commerce today is conducted by countries which are linked to regional pacts. And this is very significant. And if every country, is going to be party to RTAs, FTAs, and moving away from the multilateral trading system, then in a way, I think you will be contributing to a dual system, dual hierarchy. The private sector in particular will be adversely affected because which rules should they comply with? The rules of the multilateral trading system or the rules of the regional pacts? How consistent are the rules with the rules of multilateralism? I mean, there are several questions which are being asked. But unfortunately, the WTO doesn't seem to be very well equipped at the moment. The Article 24, which is supposed to be the legal provision governing this, is ineffective. And I don't think a legal solution to this problem will be the way forward. I think the way forward will be for WTO members to discuss this, embrace this regional pact, and see how they can ensure there is convergence and consistency in terms of what is being done in the RTAs and what's being done in the multilateral system. I think that is another challenge that is facing the WTO. And of course, Samchai, you mentioned about emerging issues, and I'm just talking about climate change mitigation, energy, food security. These are issues, real issues of public concern. And it has got implications on trade. but the WTO is not responding assertively, effectively to these issues. But I must again add here that WTO cannot be considered as the policeman of the world. And it cannot be expected to address issues which are multidimensional in nature and which requires the involvement of other multilateral institutions as well. Climate change, for example, food security. There's FAO, there is World Bank, there is IMF, there's a framework convention on climate change as well. All these they all have to work together. So I think that what the WTO need to do is to work with these countries, with these institutions, and to find solutions, which will be multidimensional, which is more holistic and more comprehensive. It cannot be looked at by the WTO alone, because you cannot look at these issues purely from a trade prism alone. It has to be multidimensional. So that is in respect of the new issues which are emerging. And I didn't mention about the financial flows and the volatility in exchange rates. All these have impact on trade flows. They have to be addressed in the WTO. And I know the final one that I want to mention is, although due to the time constraint, there are many other challenges, but I just want to talk about the role of ministers in the multilateral trading system. We have these ministerial meetings once in 2 years, but they are there just to, I think they probably like it because there's no pressure. They go there, they look at what's the status, the progress is on the round of negotiation, but they very seldom sit down and discuss or review the changing multilateral trading system. What are the challenges? What are the problems? What are the hurdles which are confronting the global trade regime, and what kind of, how do they advise the Geneva process, the missions in Geneva, to look at some issues and see how this can be addressed. That kind of guidance, that kind of instructions are not coming from the ministers at the regular ministerial meetings. I think the time has come where the ministerial meetings have to be more proactive, must be more engaged, because I'm one of those who believe very strongly, if this is discussed at the ministerial meeting, issues are discussed, an agreement is reached as to what should be the work of the WTO, what should be the work of the committees in the WTO. I think that will contribute significantly to reducing tensions, within the WTO membership. What we have today is that there are countries, there are groups of industries coming and putting pressure on ministers as a bilateral meeting. Please look at this issue. Launch a round of negotiations on this because it's good for the country without any proper discussion, no detailed discussion, and that's not good for the WTO system. And somehow he puts the WTO system, in a state of flag, And the worker committees come to a standstill. It's all about negotiations. And mind you, the trade liberalization aspect of WTO, its importance is diminishing because of these RTAs. So there's another challenge there. How do we still continue with this liberalization in WTO? In what form? I think the big bang kind of rounds of negotiations are no longer relevant, multilateral. We need to look at specific areas, sectors, and see how this can be done. And this is where ministerial guidance is essential. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Datuk Subramaniyam just echoes. He has been echoing Professor Somchai's statement that the present organizations, global organizations, might have too many limitations in trying to see that good and equitable economic order takes place in a global sense. And he has been discussing suggesting some ideas whereby the role of the WTO may be improved, also that you alone cannot achieve the solutions that we are looking towards. He made some kind of strong statements. I don't know if he made it while he was still ambassador to his minister or not. But since he's retired, maybe you can say something more aggressive than in the past. So I would like to open the floor for some question and answers. We may have about 5 to 10 minutes, and I would like the speakers to make their last statements. So I'm trying to see if anyone would like to make any suggestions or have any questions to make. Yes, on my right-hand side, please. Our speaker from Indonesia.
Thank you for the very fantastic presentation of the three speakers. I tried to make sense of the presentation of the three speakers, and It seems to me that there are two different views in the presentation. One is the presentation of from Mr. Subramanian, who says that the multilateral trading system, which has been working so far, is serving countries in different ways, but mostly in a positive ways. But at the same time, the two other speakers seem to indicate that two presentations seem to indicate that we are heading to a very problematic situation, especially with the expansion of the issues and the changing nature of the relations in International Economic Forum. Especially important in this case is the rise of China. The rise of China tends to be seen as something which is threatening. So I would like to try to combine all the presentations, assuming that multilateral trading system seem to work very well up to now. Where will China fit in? Of course, China's economy is growing, and no doubt that China will grow further, and optimistic view, like Mr. Wong's view, indicates that China will overtake the US as the biggest economy in the world. Now, let's think beyond simply the number and the size of the economy of China. What makes China different as the biggest player in the economy? Will China work along with the existing multilateral trading system? Or will China create a new and different economic system for the world? If you look at the history, a functioning, well-functioning economic system requires the biggest economic player to play a positive role, like the US, for example, play as the, first of all, as a hegemonic economic power, to make sure that the economy works very well. Will China also play that role? During the heyday of American economy plays the role as, for example, what I did here. The US economy plays the role as the market, absorbing the product of the other countries, as well as the lender of the last resort, for example. Will China also play that role? If we cannot see that China will play the same role, then what kind of role that the China economy will play in the era where China economy is dominating? Thank you.
Okay, I know Professor Wong wants to say something very much, but I would like to give the floor to Professor Sugiano's question to Datak first, and second can be Professor Wong.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Mahadi. I think the way you put it is not something that I will entirely agree. I didn't really, I think the overall message that has come out from Dr. Sanchai as well as from John is that all multilateral institutions, including the WTO, is at crossroads. And there is indeed a need for reforms to be instituted in these multilateral institutions, including the WTO, simply because the kind of issues which are emerging. Well, the WTO, as I mentioned earlier on, under GATT, it was functioning reasonably well. But I did stress that with the conclusion of the Uruguay Round agreements and the establishment of the WTO, the scenario has somewhat changed. And I did conclude by saying that the WTO doesn't seem to be prepared or well equipped to effectively address these emerging issues. So that is the message that I think to go away and say that WTO, nothing's wrong with the WTO, I don't think that is the message that I was trying to convey. It's not irrevocably broken, but that indeed there are fault lines in the WTO which need to be corrected in order for it to sustain its relevance, credibility, and legitimacy. And the second point about leadership, in multilateral institutions, in the WTO. I can speak on behalf of the WTO. We are beginning to see that the US in particular is not displaying the kind of leadership that it demonstrated during the Uruguay round negotiations. Because there were areas of interest to US, so there was tremendous and there was leadership from US, from the private sector of US, and so on and so on. But somehow, they don't seem to be actively engaged in the Doha process, and that's why we have seen this stalemate, in this Doha round of multilateral trade negotiations. But what is important to the WTO, the WTO cannot be run by one or two countries. It has to be run collectively by all members of the WTO, and this is where I'm very happy with the development that you have China, you have some ASEAN countries, you have, BRIC countries, for example, or Brazil, for example, who's beginning to play a very important role, collectively in shaping WTO's agenda and to ensure that the WTO continues to remain relevant for the future.
Yes, okay. President Wong, please.
Thank you. Actually, can you? It's on. Actually, I can adjust both issues. Now, to start with, I would endorse, Mr. Subramanian has said, with the rise of China, all the major international organizations, institutions will be under pressure to change, because we all know that, those from World Bank, IMF, and WTO and others have been dominated basically by Western power, i.e. US, you see. So eventually they have to share power to change, would be actually in better time. And in fact, you look at even ADB, it's dominated by Japan, see. But now with the Japanese economy in decline, China has more capital, foreign direct investment going out. Eventually, so it has to be have to change. If not, China set up another shop outside for infrastructure. This is quite inevitable. Now, the other issue, more important, is that how is China different from other economies in terms of growth and development? I think number one is size. Size matter, size and diversity. I've been always trying to remind a lot of the audience that you see, when Japan, Korea, all the countries achieved, they have after 20-25 year high growth, they become almost developed country. Their income very high. So the next phase, suddenly the growth will come down to, first 3 years 6%, 5%, 4%, and eventually the economy become mature very fast and low growth, 2 to 3%. See, and China now after, now not the 25, 35 year high growth, they're still growing at very high rate, 7.8%, 2 years that, you call it low growth. Why it is? Because, only part of China has, achieved their, their full development potential. The other part of China interior, they still have potential, So that is always, something we have to bear in mind. China is, and also it means that, China will take much longer time for China to become a developed economy, to develop other part of the, the country. So in terms of growth, actually, and strategy, China's economic growth is the strategy very much like a handful of East Asian economy, export orientation, still, and based on human capital, based on high saving, high investment, and grow first, redistribution later, grow first, democracy later, and so on and so forth. See, so it's and those, in fact, those countries in East Asia alone have made it. That's why I look at the World Bank. Of the 100-odd economy, only 11 of those economies, basically in East Asia, have, escaped the so-called middle income trap. See, in China, is going to make it because the single development strategy, grow first, invest, and then and save, and then consume. See, so in that sense, it's not different from Japan, from Korea, Taiwan, but different from a lot of the country, Latin America, based on primary production, import substitution. They ignore the infrastructure, their human capital base very low and so forth. So China is different in that sense. Yeah? But of course, China is very big. Then you look at the negative side. I can go on half an hour, and there's a lot of problem also. Very messy when you're big. It's very messy. You want to see problem, you always find one. A big country.
President Somchai.
Yes, I want to sum up in just one sentence. I think the world is now at the crossroad, particularly the multilateral institution. The problem here, we call the new issue, what we call the plurality of issue, but the multilateral is not addressing what we call the plural. It's just the lateral, but not enough to address what we call the plural of dimension. And it's not only one by one, but related in connectivity. So I think that we are just at the crossroad. We need a lot of new institution and also the transforming of the old institution to address what we call the plurality of issue. The multilateral is not enough to deal with what we call plurality of the issue. Thank you.
Okay. Just to sum up, because we're running out of time and you can ask questions from the speakers later, just to say it's very clear that we are concerned with we have new leaders coming up in the global economic we call stage, and we are concerned about whether they will act responsibly so that we have equitable global kind of order. And we're questioning whether the present institutions can manage all this kind of complications, and we hope they will do so. So I would like to thank our speakers for bringing this issue up, and we work together to see whether we can assist each other in trying to make sure that we can ensure a global economic equitable mechanism. Okay, so please give a big hand to the three speakers, please. Thank you.